Okay, welcome everyone to our weekly Law of One study. We're going to be covering session 22 this week, and there's 29 Q&As. I think we'll probably try to get through it all this week, if we can. And before we get started, I'm going to invite BJ to just open the space for us with some words.
Thanks. Okay, so let's all take a moment to feel the gratitude that we experience for those of Ra offering us this channel, this information. Ra, we thank you. We share our gratitude with you for being our teachers, for being our guides. Thank you for walking the way before us and supporting us on our journey. Thank you to our friends at LL Research, those who have come before and those who are still present on the team. Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Austin. Thank you to all the LL team. And thank you to all of our higher selves and our allies. Thank you for supporting our journeys. May we walk it well.
Thanks, BJ.
Sure thing.
Yeah, feels really nice to give back in this way before we dive into the study, just to open the space with some thanks. Okay, so with that opening, we can get into the reading. 22.0. Anyone feel willing to start the reading for us?
I can.
Great.
How far do you?
Let's do we'll do Carla's questions. So I think it's just the first. So 0, 1, and 2.
All right. Session 22, February 10th, 1981. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and in the light of the one of the infinite creator. I communicate now. Questioner. The instrument would like to ask a couple of questions of you. I'll get them out of the way first. The instrument would like to know why she smells the incense at various times during the day in various places. I am Ra. This instrument has spent a lifetime in dedication to service. This has brought this instrument to this nexus in space-time with the conscious and unconscious distortion towards service, with the further conscious distortion towards service by communication. Each time, as you would put it, that we perform this working, our social memory complex vibrational distortion meshes more firmly with this instrument's unconscious distortion towards service. Thus, we are becoming a part of this instrument's vibratory complex and it a part of ours. This occurs upon the unconscious level, the level whereby the mind has gone down through to the roots of consciousness, which you may call cosmic. This instrument is not consciously aware of this slow changing of the meshing vibratory complex. However, as the dedication on both levels continues and the workings continue, there are signals sent from the unconscious in a symbolic manner. Because this instrument is extremely keen in its sense of smell, this association takes place unconsciously, and the thought form of this odor is witnessed by the entity. Questioner. Secondly, she would like to know why she feels more healthy now after she does these sessions. She's generally feeling more healthy as time goes on. I am Ra. This is a function of the free will of the entity. This entity has, for many of your years, prayed a certain set of sound vibration complexes before opening to communication. Before the trance state was achieved, this prayer remained within the conscious portion of the mind complex, and, though helpful, was not as effective as the consequence of this prayer, as you would call this vibrational sound complex, which then goes directly into the unconscious level, thus more critically affecting the communication from the spiritual complex. Also, this entity has begun, due to this working, to accept certain limitations which it placed upon itself in order to set the stage for services such as it now performs. This also is an aid to realigning the distortions of the physical complex with regard to pain.
Great. Thanks, Nia. Okay, anybody want to take a pass at? Let's start with the first one, the incense, the smelling of incense. What's going on there? What do you all make of that? What do you think Ra's response is saying? Why does she smell incense throughout the day when there's no incense physically burning in her space, in the space she's in?
Well, the clearest piece that I picked up on is they said there are signals sent from the unconscious in a symbolic manner. So it's unconscious, symbolic signals.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something about the smell of incense, and it's a symbol for her.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine it's a symbol for like the sacredness that she's starting to experience with the meshing that is happening unconsciously. That's what I guess, that there's like sort of a more sacred experience happening on the subconscious level or unconscious level, I guess.
Right. Yep. Nia?
I agree with BJ, and what I picked out was that she's had a previous lifetime of service to others, that in this lifetime of devotion was a lot of incense. And so that triggers her subconscious and her spirit complex to reverse, kind of like reverse symbolism. It's giving itself back to her. It's a reminder to her on a spirit level, the symbology of incense being a sacred devotional piece. And so what I'm pulling out of that is the more and Ross says, because this instrument is extremely keen in its sense of smell, that's the piece that comes out instead of her. So for me, a lot of mine is visual. I might see something over and over and over, the symbol. I'm like, man, I got to really look up what the symbol is. This has got a lot going on. It's like, it won't leave me alone. So I've had reflections. I'm like, oh, and I've had another person concur that they've seen that in a past life as well. And so for me, it's visual symbolism. For her, it was scent. But to me, that is something that her spirit complex would recognize, and that it's being funneled into her subconscious experience now. And that's just how it turns out for her. But it's symbolic of, but I am interested that Ra kind of flipped it into we are becoming a part of this instrument's vibratory complex, and she a part of ours. That feels like a little extra add-on that Ra gave us that wasn't specified in the question, which I thought was an interesting, notable piece. Your cat is cracking me up.
Me too. That's super cute.
Yeah. Well, yeah, to pick up on that last piece, Nia, I think another reason why incense might be the symbol that's sent or that stands out besides the fact that she is extremely keen of smell. Remember, every time they drop into a session with Ra, they burn incense. So there's a strong association for her with these sessions and with being with Ra speaking through her with incense specifically. And so I think that's probably another reason why that's the symbol that's sent by the unconscious mind, because it's specifically related, directly related to these sessions with Ra.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And I also appreciate what you said, BJ. I imagine it's probably also true that incense in general is a part of her, her subconscious mind from all of the times that she, maybe spent in temple or spent in, sacred spaces that were burning incense. So I think that's probably, I imagine that may be relevant too. And the piece that stands out to me is that it, in this, on February 10th, 1981, in this time of her life, incense is probably going to be having a strong relationship with the Ra sessions, where she goes into trance and the incense is filling the room, and et cetera, and she's blending with Ra. So that's cool. Okay, so moving on to the second piece about, okay, so she feels more healthy. And then Ra gives some reply to why that might be. Does anyone want to take a pass at what that means to them? What Ra's response is? We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but I'm just curious. I'll go ahead and just say what I think, if it's helpful. I imagine this piece about her saying a prayer before she goes into trance, and then the prayer is kind of staying in her conscious mind. I imagine like it's kind of like she's repeating it silently to herself, or she's hearing it in her mind silently. And that portion of the prayer work that she's doing isn't as powerful as like that prayer. She says the prayer, and then the prayer goes in, like kind of like drops into the deeper portion of her mind. And it's like a call. It's like what Ra calls a call. And the call goes into her very self, her her larger self, her larger life. And from the resources of that larger portion of herself, it's beginning to bear fruit. The prayer that she's been saying that, that probably had to do with helping her have improved health, because she's had health issues her whole life, are bearing fruit. And it seems like what Ra is saying, it's bearing fruit specifically because of the sort of like setup that she's in now, that just started just a month ago, where now when she says this prayer, it's able to kind of like, she takes it into trance, and it kind of goes into this, what feels potentially like a more potent part of herself, or a more potent space, because she's dropping into trance. Because I'm pretty sure that before the Ra sessions started, and again, this is about a month prior is when they first started. Before then, she'd never gone into trance before. Trance was not something that she intended to, she didn't like cultivate trance channeling as like a conscious act. It kind of happened in a somewhat spontaneous and natural way when Ra came in. So I think the trance channeling, when her going into trance, is like she's in meditation, she's saying the prayer, she's asking for good health, and then she drops into trance. And then that, like the vibration, the reverberation of that prayer she's saying is then able to like go deeply into her, the deeper part of herself. And it's bearing fruit. And she's experiencing improved health. So that's interesting. And then also she has made lifestyle changes based on Ra's recommendations for how to stabilize the channel. She's made lifestyle changes, and she's given things up in order to stabilize the channel. So that's helping her also. That's my take. Anything else anybody wants to say or ask about that before we move on?
I just wanted to add a little highlight, give a little highlight to the second paragraph that says, this entity has begun due to this working to accept certain limitations which it placed upon itself in order to set the stage for services such as it now performs. I just think that is really special. I already mentioned the brain fog earlier. I'm having a hard time with what my words, so I'm having a hard time like forming why that feels special, but it's something to do with just accepting limitations and allowing those limitations to help guide you to the path that you're truly supposed to be on, and not maybe what you might choose if you had not had those limitations in place. So seeing it as a blessing to yourself, and surrendering to that. And obviously, in the case of Carla, accepting those limitations allowed her to do something that nobody else on this planet ever did, to my knowledge. And maybe I'm wrong, but at least the way that it expressed through her, this material is completely unique to my knowledge again. And so her accepting of that allowed her to manifest a niche, so to speak. And that just feels really special.
Yeah, I agree. And that resonates. And I think that was really well put, Rachel. It was really articulate. Thanks for pointing that out. I think that's a really nice point.
Yeah, it really stood out for me too. And I appreciate you bringing it up, like the piece about accepting the limitations. It doesn't necessarily remove the limitations, but there's a realigning, and that's really powerful. It's really powerful.
Yep.
One
Thanks,
very
Rachel.
small thing that I noticed was that Ra called the odor a thought form, which that I myself have been trying to figure out what a thought form is. So like the fact that he called the odor a thought form, like it's not present in the physical world. It's something that is within her mind. It just caught my eye. Just a little detail.
It's a great, Shang, it's a great, I think it's well worth putting our attention on this thought form. It's going to come up over and over again. Ra uses this hyphenated complex of thought form, and they use it in different contexts. And it's diverse. It can mean different things depending on what context it's used in. And yeah, I think it's really interesting that, there's an odor. It's not being created by anything, that is coming through the space-time, the natural space-time processes that create odor that we detect with our senses, our physical senses. It's coming directly from the mind. It's coming directly from her own subconscious mind, as a thought that manifests as a so-called form that is being picked up by her, by her sort of like subtle senses, not her physical smell, but whatever corresponds to physical smell that is an etheric sense. Her spiritual sense of smell picks up this thought form of odor. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, I've considered that a fair amount in meditative self-inquiry, for instance, that like there's things that we see with the mind's eye. Like I can return to a moment in the past and like close my eyes and see that thing, but I'm not seeing it with my physical eyes. And I can also smell something. I can I can smell my grandmother's house, even though I haven't been, like I was there when I was 12 or something, and I think those are thought forms. Like we can understand thought forms by experiencing them directly in meditation, or at least begin to understand thought forms in a way.
Yeah. Just a small point about this, a friend of ours, who's, part of the collective here, and I think we've talked about this on some of the earlier calls, but she has the hypothesis that thought form, Ra might have actually intended it to have a slash instead of a hyphen, which would make it one of these paired, like teach, learning, learn, teachings, one of these bundled concepts. And then that would suggest the possibility of a form thought, a thought form, and a form thought. And it's interesting because it's like, if I could recall the smell of incense, which I can't, I don't have that kind of memory. But if I could recall the kind of smell of incense and recall that, that might be a form thought. That might be sort of recalling something, a form that I did perceive with my body. And now I'm recalling through thought. Anyway, this is hypothetical, but I just appreciate, and I'm reintroducing the idea that thought form might be one of these like concepts that have kind of a dual nature, or like there's thought which precedes form. All forms are preceded by thought, right? The idea of like the original idea of the creator is where everything comes from. And then there's, once it comes into manifestation, whether it's through the natural processes of evolution and the logoic creation, or whether it's directly from mind manifestation, may actually be, that we may be able to have experiences of form thoughts and as well as thought forms anyway. But it's just sort of a theory, just putting it out there for contemplation. Mike?
Yeah, not to beat a dead horse, but I like you, Aaron. I can think about a scent, but I don't get the scent again. Like I can consciously think about what incense smells like, and I know that smell and just aspects of it, but I'm not getting the smell. Do you know? I don't know if BJ, you literally get the smell in your head when you think of it. I don't. I get a very, like I'm reading it from paper, kind of feel for it. I did see something interesting in a science article recently about smell, and that it's not, it's actually vibration that the body detects to identify smell. So the molecules of whatever they're smelling, how it's vibrating is how you detect the smell, not actually the molecule itself. Which I found very interesting, because there's so many of the works that we dig deep into that talk about how everything is vibration.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I mean, it kind of matches my model of reality. I actually don't think there is any matter. I don't think anything is solid and fixed and kind of frozen. I think everything is in a state of vibration. And I think that's not a very controversial thing to say anymore.
Yeah.
I think that modern, physics and science is being able to perceive more deeply into matter and find that there's actually less and less matter down there than we thought. It's all states of motion. Cool. Okay, let's keep moving on through. So 22.3, anyone feel like picking up? Reading?
I'll read.
Great.
How long until?
Let's just get into it. I'm not sure. I don't have a preconceived notion, but maybe
Okay.
4, 5, 6 Q&As or something.
All right. 22.3. Questioner, thank you. I'll ask a couple of questions to clear up the end of the cycle, the end of the second cycle, the second major cycle. And then we'll go on to the third and last of the major cycles. Can you tell me the lifespan, the average lifespan at the end of the second major cycle? Ra, I am Ra. By the end of the second major cycle, the lifespan was as you know it, with certain variations among geographically isolated peoples more in harmony with intelligent energy and less bellicose. Questioner, can you tell me the length of that average span in years at the end of the second major cycle? Ra, I am Ra. The average is perhaps misleading. To be precise, many spent approximately 35 to 40 of your years in one incarnation, with the possibility not considered abnormal of a lifespan approaching 100 of your years. Questioner, then can I assume then that this drastic drop from 700-year lifespan to one less than 100 years in length during the second 25,000-year period was because of an intensification of a condition of lack of service to others? Is this correct? Ra, I am Ra. This is in part correct. By the end of the second cycle, the law of responsibility had begun to be effectuated by the increasing ability of entities to grasp those lessons which there are to be learned in this density. Thus, entities had discovered many ways to indicate a bellicose nature, not only as tribes or what you call nations, but in personal relationships with each other. The concept of barter had given way in many cases to the concept of money. Also, the concept of ownership having one ascendancy over the concept of non-ownership on an individual or group basis. Each entity then was offered many more subtle ways of demonstrating either service to others or service to self, with the distortion of the manipulation of others. As each lesson was understood, those lessons of sharing, of giving, of receiving in free gratitude, each lesson could be rejected in practice. Without demonstrating the fruits of such learned teaching, the lifespan became greatly reduced, for the ways of honor duty were not being accepted. Questioner, would this shortened lifespan help the entity in any way, in that he would have more times in between incarnations to review his mistakes, or would this shortened lifespan hinder him? Ra, I am Ra. Both are correct. The shortening of the lifespan is a distortion of the law of one, which suggests that an entity not receiving more experience and more intensity than it may bear. This is only an effect upon an individual level and does not hold sway over planetary or social complexes. Thus, the shortened lifespan is due to the necessity for removing an entity from the intensity of experience which ensues when wisdom and love are, having been rejected, reflected back into the consciousness of the Creator without being accepted as part of the self. This then causing the entity to have the need for healing and for much evaluation of the incarnation. The incorrectness lies in the truth that, given appropriate circumstances, a much longer incarnation in your space-time continuum is very helpful for continuing this intensive work until conclusions have been reached through the catalytic process. And that
Okay.
seems like a good
Yeah,
place to
it
stop.
does. Thank you, Rachel. That's really nice. Okay, so these last two are pretty, there's a lot woven in there. So let's unpack it a little bit. So Don's getting back into his line of questioning, trying to go kind of chronologically through the three major cycles of third density, and picking up where he left off from last session, focusing in on lifespan. So this question of lifespan and how it has reduced over the past, from the beginning of third density until now. And then the reasons for that, the sort of specific reasons, metaphysical reasons and purpose and implications of all that. So yeah, let's just open it up. Any thoughts, comments, questions on any of that?
So like, I'm trying to understand more intuitively, like why the lifespan shortens. I mean, like Ross says, like, oh, you're rejecting the law of responsibility, which I don't really know what that law is, and a few things about like honor, duty. So like, I'm gonna take a stab at it, which could be wrong. So like, people choose to keep living, right? At some sense, like especially when they get older, like at least my understanding is like you can choose to leave. And I've seen like at least like I personally have seen this in like older people where like they're just not there. Like they're no, like they're here physically, but not there. Like they're basically ready to leave. So is this like the lifespan is shortening because you have nothing to live for? Like you have these lessons, unless if you're not engaged in the lessons, then you're not really here. Like you're just basically waiting to die in a sense. Like, is that what's happening here? Like there are all these lessons which are like, if you're engaged and you're living for these lessons and you're growing, and if all these lessons are here and you're not doing them, then why are you here? Like, does that I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, well, that resonates for me, what you're saying, Shang, and what Ra says in 22.5 when they say the law of responsibility had begun to be effectuated by the increasing ability of entities to grasp those lessons, which there are to be learned in this density. So it seems like the mass mind of humanity during the first 25,000 year cycle was fairly rudimentary. Like it hadn't developed very much, and so like the possibility of, kind of grasping the purpose of life on Earth was a little bit less developed. But in the second density, in the second cycle, the mass mind of humanity began to become more sophisticated and more capable of grasping the fundamental purpose of incarnation. Why are we alive? Why are we here? So it became closer at hand. And so I think what you're saying, Sean, makes sense to me. It's like on some level, we all know why we're here. We don't know it in the conscious sense until we do. I mean, on this call, we all, I think, share a pretty strong sense of why we're here. But until we do, we may not know it in our conscious mind, but I think all beings who incarnate on Earth know why they're here in the subconscious level. I mean, all of our higher selves know it. But in the second master cycle, it became actually more ripened. The mass mind became more ripe to the capacity to understand that. And even so, the entities weren't getting to it. They weren't getting to the main purpose of it, like you're saying. And so, yeah, there's something about like, they're just calling it in. And so at a certain point, there isn't the will to stick around, because on some level, they know that they're not getting what they came for. They're not getting to the work that they came to do. So what you're saying kind of resonates for me. Rachel, what do you have to say?
What I was going to share isn't in response to Shang. So if anyone else has a response, then I'll welcome that, and then I can and blah, blah, blah. I'll catch you on the tail end.
I can respond. What stood out a lot to me was the piece about intensity, as much intensity as they could bear. And then, as much intensity as they could bear. And then also, they pointed to intensity again. The intensity ensues when wisdom and love, having been rejected, are reflected back into the creator, and thus causing the entity the need for healing. What that points to me to is like just really getting drawn into the illusion. And I don't think this is different than what you're saying, Aaron, but maybe just kind of a different way of saying it or looking at it. That like when wisdom and love aren't accepted, we're living in illusion, and it feels as though there's an experience of rift and separation from creator that needs to be healed. And like there's only so much of that level of intensity that we can bear. And I feel like it's like a way, it feels to me like it's part of the way that, we have guardians, we have guides, and they're like, okay, that's enough. Like you get in the ring, but you're only going to be, we're limiting it because there's only so much that we think that you can handle, and then we're pulling you out, in terms of like just the sort of the tendency of, I think, the illusion and the our cultures really to be so inclined towards the illusion of material reality and you know, this is what I am the body, and yeah, it's just so inclined towards intensity, the intensity of not understanding what's really going on. The illusion is so strong that that's a lot. That's my sense, Sean. I don't know if that's helpful for you.
Yeah, that intensity comment really resonates. It's like, I mean, there are periods of time, like either like there are periods of time where like I feel like I age a lot. And like I think about those times and like it's like the stress of life, right? And then when I think about the stress of life, yeah, it's like the stress of the day-to-day like material stuff, like focused on like the times that feel like easy and like they go really fast are like I'm like really aligned. I feel like I'm really aligned with what I'm doing. And then like uh you know, there are times the times where I feel like, oh my God, like I feel like I aged 10 years in 1 year. Is like when I'm just really focused on like the material day to day. Yeah, so that resonates a lot.
Yeah, it does for me too. And I think, BJ, the thing you were pointing out about the, you know, the part about when love and wisdom are rejected, you know, the kind of intensity that creates for us is kind of another way of saying, like, you know, Ra says that we can always find love in the moment. Like all there is love. Everything is made of love and light. But we can certainly not be aware of that. We can get caught in the illusion and only see things through kind of a material frame. And I think that kind of like taken together, that is at least one aspect of what Ra calls the quiet horror that is the third density experience on Earth. Like, I think that when they say, like, it's a pretty intense statement, you know, they say like that from the perspective of higher density entities, they are aware of the quality of what it is to be alive on Earth, and they call it a sort of quiet horror. And I think they call it that because the mass mind of Earth is so locked in the illusion. It's so locked in the material frame only. I mean, obviously there's reality to the material frame, but there's a lack of understanding of the spiritual underpinning of the material frame. It's not integrated.
I want
And
to say something about that.
and then I think it creates an incredibly intense experience of suffering. I think we suffer when we think the illusion is real. I think it's incredibly hard and painful and sad and difficult. And so that has this sort of like suppressing effect on the lifespan, because we need to get back to time space so we can heal from the intensity and the suffering of that.
Yeah. I just want to chime in and say, I think one of the shorthands that has helped me understand the quiet horror is just the shift from it's happening to me to it's happening for me. That feels like such a shift.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Rachel, I'm curious what you wanted to say.
Yeah, I'm enjoying listening to what you all are responding. What I was going to share was it's a little bit of a tributary from what Sean asked, but
Let's do
I
it.
was
Let's tributary. Let's travel down that little side road.
yeah, I was only going to share the correlation between what's shared in this passage with the Old Testament. The Old Testament mentions humans living hundreds of years, and then, to paraphrase it, God got bad at them because they weren't learning the lessons and they were being pretty mean to each other. So he shortened their lifespan. And I think it's really interesting to see that correlation in this passage. That
Yeah.
was it.
Yeah, there's a whole, isn't there like a list in one of the passages, there's like a list of I don't remember like how they refer to them, but all these, church fathers or something and their lifespan,
Yep.
including
Yeah.
Noah.
Yes. Yeah. The Old
And they were like
Testament.
hundreds of years, like like Noah lived like 900 years or something, is I think is what they say.
I don't remember the exact number of his age, but they do go through a sort of genealogy
Mhm.
of the I guess the early Judaic monotheism and what their ages were. And it's interesting because after the lifespan was shortened, they in some cases they also mention how long those people lived, and it was less than 100 years. So I just find that correlation to be really interesting.
Yeah, me too.
And I like seeing, I really like when Ra mentions something that's correlated to another source, not always a Christian source, but a Hindu or anything, any folk mythology, etc. It always kind of lights me up. But I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that connection. I just want to say a quick thing about that. I made a slide. I found that same connection with the Old Testament, and I made a slide when I did a video condensing the law of one into a slideshow, 2-hour slideshow. It's on YouTube, and I have a slide on those beings that are mentioned in the Bible. And I think that the interesting, to me, the biggest contrast of the way that the Bible tells that and the way that Ra talks about it is that, God didn't shorten our lifespans because we weren't doing a good job. Like, it's much less of a separated story. Like, we are a part, like we co-created for ourselves a lessening of our own lifespans as a part of the planetary complex, as a part of the living body of the planet. We are co-creating the conditions of our lifespan through our actions and our choices. We are God. It's all one entity. It's the law of one. And it's not like this external, God doing things to tweak because we've been good or bad. In this telling, it's like, we're participating in the living process that is the universe, that is the earth. And that is like the context that we set up for ourselves to learn the lessons that we want to learn as God, as a portion of the logos, as sub logoi. So that's the big contrast, is like the way that we're so embedded in God. We're so embedded as God through our co-creative powers as sub logoi in the fractal mind of the one infinite creator.
I love that. Mike has his hand up, and then I wanted to share one more thing after that.
Cool.
And we can move on.
Mike.
Yeah, mine was just it's separate also, but just more of a semantic question. They talk about these 25-year cycles as major cycles, which would make you think, are there minor cycles within these 25 years? And I don't remember them mentioning that anywhere in the Law of One.
I don't think they do. It's a great question, Mike. I've had the same question. My guess is that, if we were to put on sort of a astrological lens on it, there'd be like 12. If you divide a major cycle by 12, there'd be minor cycles of, what are they? 2,100 years or something like that would be a minor cycle. And I do think that the major cycle correlates with the astronomical event that we call the precession of the equinoxes.
Right.
So I think the precession of the equinoxes, which is the amount of time it takes for the Earth's, axis to rotate one full rotation as it does its cycling around the sun, is about 25,800 years or something. And that takes place in the context of, like, as it rotates, we sort of for 2,100 years, we face a different house in astrology. So I don't know much about astrology, but I think there is a name for that in astrology, where there's like a 2100-year cycle that would be the minor cycle of the major cycle that we're talking about. That's just my guess. Ron never gets into it, and they never really answered that question.
Like moving
What-
into that house of Aquarius.
Exactly.
And then,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I thought the major cycle was the 75,000-year cycle, and the 3 minor ones are the 25,000 ones.
No, it's weird. The major is 25,000, and then 75,000 they call a master cycle.
Oh, I see.
I know, it's confusing. You would think a major cycle was the whole thing, but no, the major cycle is the 25,000 year. And then the master is the 75,000 year the whole shebango, the whole triad. Rachel, did you want to ask or
Let me just say one more thing. At one point, when we were studying this years ago and going through, someone did a correlation with the yugas, which is like the Vedic telling of the cycles of consciousness and how long those take. And I don't really remember, but that's something to look into. And maybe you're already connected to that, Rachel, but yeah. Oh, I guess it wasn't Rachel's question. Whoever brought it up, I don't know. If you're interested, Yuga.
I
and
like
Sri
it anyway.
Sri Yukteswar wrote a book on correlating the yugas with the more like Western astrological map. It's called, isn't it called like the Sacred Science or something? But do you remember that little book that Sri Yukteswar? Sri Yukteswar was
remember.
Paramahansa Yogananda's guru.
Guru.
And he got this download about these big cycles, and he did a pretty modern, it was not that long ago that he did a take on these cycles, these grand cycles. And of course, there's also the Mayan calendar as a symbolic map of these cosmic cycles. I think there's all these cultures that were tuned in to these cycles that were embedded within, and they tell them in different ways. It's fascinating.
I've seen the correlation a long time ago between, maybe it wasn't that long ago, because I've only been in the raw loop for a couple of years, but I've seen the correlation between the cycles with I think the cycles with the Mayan and the Hindu calendars. It's really fascinating. I was gonna just loop back with another interesting tidbit about the Old Testament, because Aaron, you brought up a really good point about the contrast, and I really loved what you shared, and just I appreciated that. But it brought up the reminder of what Ra mentions about being discerning with the Bible because it's distorted. And I was talking with a friend of mine who is an Orthodox Jew, and I was sharing with her a couple of weeks ago when we were going over the Yahweh material. I was sharing with her what Ra says about Yahweh and about the Jewish people, because she's an observant Jew, but she's also really open-minded and spiritual. So she was open to listening to it. And I had mentioned how not the Ra contact, how the Moses, I think Moses did the 10 Commandments, right? Yeah. How he was confused. He had gotten a distorted message about, he was talking to Yahweh, and then he was talking to the Orion people, if I remember correctly.
Mm-hmm.
Orion, not people, but you know what I mean. But I had mentioned that, and she said, that's really interesting, because in the 10 Commandments, the first 5 are affirmative. They're affirmatively written. And the last 5 are negatively written. They're do not. The first 5 are thou shalt, and the second 5 are do not, or thou shalt not, And I thought that was really interesting. Now, I don't know if if he was writing them down as he was receiving them, and like halfway through the Orion group took over. But I don't know how that happened, but I thought she brought up a really interesting point, and I meant to share it when we were closer to the material, but I figured I'd drop it in here since I brought up the Old Testament.
That's super fascinating. I mean, the whole like opportunity that exists between like bridging the law of one and people who are really steeped in biblical scholarship and both Christian and, you know, Judaic like traditions is so profound. Like, I think like what could be learned by having that interface between people who are, you know, steeped in both is really strong. But it does take a lot of open-mindedness because, you know, there's a lot of things that Ra drops that seem kind of antithetical to
Yeah,
people
it's
who are
heresy.
really, yeah, it's totally heretical to people who are really taking the word that is written in the Bible as literal. Some people just kind of can't go there. But for people who can go there, I feel like there's so much opportunity for like learning and deepening into the teachings because they both have so much to, you know, to teach us.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think what Ra says is that about the 10 commandments is that even whether it's shall or shall not, they're commandments, and they evoke an external sense of right and wrong, and who's the one who knows what's going to be good for me or not good for me. And it's that commandment part, whether it's positive or negative, that is what twists the whole thing into a negatively polarizing teaching.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Because to command someone to do something or to command someone to not do something is still a command. And it's still an external authority. And it will, you know, if we are to operate our lives that way, we're not tuning into the wisdom of our own higher selves and, you know, mapping our own path through the lessons of life. You know, we have to do that for ourselves. But what they say, what Ra also says is that what they're talking about are positive things. All the shalls and the shalt nots, what they're referring to are positive ways of living, for sure. But it's that they got turned into commandments was the trick. That was the Orion trick. Mike?
Yeah, it's almost like they could have been positively stated that, like, you know, find for yourself that, you know, your life will be better expressed when you honor your father and mother. Find for yourself that your life will be better expressed, or whatever. Like,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Or bring into contemplation the idea that,
Right.
what will it do for you if you murder someone? You know, like think
Yeah.
deeply about that, you know, rather than don't ever do it.
Yeah. Make a rule.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it is interesting, and I've always seen a translation that really has like 8 of them with like, don't do this, don't do that. It's probably just how it's translated. If Rachel, you saw a 5 and 5 kind of thing. But to Aaron's point, it's more about trying to control the people. And I'm curious, Rachel, how that went over with your friend, because it's such a rooted, important part of Orthodox Judaism, the 10 Commandments and Moses, to sort of throw any sort of, well, Moses was a very positively oriented and got misled according to Ra. I think a lot of Jewish folks would probably, it would be very hard to convince them of this. At first, when I first read this, I was like, what? And then as I got to understand the negative path better, I definitely could see how this could be, because it's funny how the negative path can what's the word I'm looking for, present itself as such a good way to go, that you're almost helping others by what you're doing when you're with us. Like a 21st century example of that is the cult, I think it was called Nexium or something. Did anybody ever hear about that? There was a whole documentary on it. And when you listen to what the guy did at the beginning, it was very, I mean, I thought, wow, it's almost like teachings of Ra and things like that we're all one in this and bringing people together. But it was all for purposes of control. And by the end, you know, he was doing things that were, you look at him and go, wow, that guy needs to be behind bars for the rest of his life, which I think he got. So it was really interesting. And I think it was very hard for a lot of the people that joined that broke away, that they're probably like people like us that sit there and say, oh, these teachings seem so good. And we're going to do so much good with this. But you twist it just the right way and it becomes a negative path.
Yep.
And you can be duped so easily.
Yep. That's just right. And I to me, the key is paying attention to like how power and authority are conveyed. Where is power and authority come from? You know, it's like, if as soon as it's outside of you, you got to watch out. You know, it's like that. That's why I trust Ra's teaching so much, because they constantly bring back, we are 100% responsible for our own evolutionary path, you know, and we're part of the creator. Like you don't look outside of yourself to figure out how to live your life and how to move forward along your own spiritual path. And the negative path is extremely gifted at the subtle art of deception. But I think that if you watch where authority is, you know, and cults is a really good place to look, like you were saying, you're looking at how cults succeed, is that authority often is, you know, placed in the charismatic leader, or, you know, it's somebody outside of you. Listen to the one who is the enlightened one, listen to the one who is the teacher, and trust what they say. And, you know, you gotta watch out for that.
So, you know, it leads me to a question, and I certainly don't want to step on anybody's toes or offend anybody, but it's a question I've had from this exact viewpoint of the path of service to self, path of service to others, as we went through COVID and everything, and the whole mask controversy that was brought up, you know, and I mean, I mean, just personally, and I don't want to offend anybody, but personally, I felt like wearing a mask was helping others, because you're making sure the hospitals don't get overrun by not getting sick. And I heard of people that, you know, I knew people that couldn't get into the hospital that needed to for cancer or whatever, because the hospitals were overrun. And so I didn't understand why people wouldn't wear masks. I mean, I've never confronted anybody, and so I always wondered, was that a controlling aspect of some sort of negative path, or was it a positive thing, or is it just your perspective?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's super important to ask it, and I think it's super important to talk about it. I mean, I don't think we're going to get deep into it here, but I appreciate you for bringing it up, and I think it's really important to talk about, because you know, I think everything went on and has been going on around the questions of what is of service to other when it comes to a public health context. Mm-hmm. And then once again, like, who do you trust? And where's, you know, it's like, we're not all experts, you know, and like some people are experts, but who's the, you know, it gets really, it's been incredibly difficult to navigate for all of us, I think. And, you know, wow. I mean, we really could, and maybe should sometime, have a whole session on this, because it's so healthy to talk about openly and in a way that like respects and honors everyone's experience. And exactly. looks again critically at everything that's happened, because I think it's worth looking at and talking about. But yeah, I mean, I don't find it offensive that you asked the question. I think it's a really important question.
I think, to your point, I totally agree. And I think there were people that used it for service to others and people that used it for service to self.
Yeah.
In how they position their messages. When I look back on what kind of happened over the last 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can use anything that way, like really, really anything, like prayer, like the things that may seem the most positive, if we're using them for control, if we're using them to manipulate, if we're using them to put ourselves in boxes. That's what I think. And I also think it might be helpful for us to continue with the reading to at least get to halfway, if not possibly finish.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't mean to
Not,
get us off on
that's great.
it.
There's so many tangents. It's great. It's great.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, BJ. I'll tell you what, I will take a pass at reading a little bit here.
Okay.
22:7. Questioner, you spoke of the South American group that was harvestable at the end of the second cycle. How long was their average lifespan at the end of the second cycle? I am Ra. This isolated group had achieved lifespans stretching upwards towards the 900-year lifespan appropriate to this density. Questioner, then I'm assuming the planetary action that we're experiencing now, which shortens, it seems, all lifespans here, was not strong enough at that time to affect them and to shorten their lifespan regardless. Is this correct? I am Ra. This is correct. It is well to remember that at that nexus in space-time, great isolation was possible. Questioner, about how many people populated the Earth totally at that time? That is, incarnated in the physical at any one time. I am Ra. I am assuming that you intend to query regarding the number of incarnate mind-body-spirit complexes at the end of the second major cycle. This number being approximately 350,000 entities. Sorry, 345,000 entities. Questioner, approximately how many were harvestable out of the total number? I am Ra. There were approximately 150 entities harvestable. Questioner, a very small number. Then as the next cycle started, are these the entities that then that stayed to work on the planet? I am Ra. These entities were visited by the Confederation and became desirous of remaining in order to aid the planetary consciousness. This is correct. Questioner, what type of visit did the Confederation make to this group of 150 entities? I am Ra. A light being appeared, bearing that which may be called a shield of light. It spoke of the oneness and infinity of all creation, and of those things which await those ready for harvest. It described in golden words the beauties of love as lived. It then allowed a telepathic linkage to progressively show those who were interested the plight of third density when seen as a planetary complex. It then left. Questioner, and did all of these entities then decide to stay and help during the next 25,000-year cycle? I am Ra. This is correct. As a group, they stayed. There were those peripherally associated with this culture which did not stay. However, they were not able to be harvested either, and so, beginning at the very highest, shall we say, of the sub-octaves of third density, repeated this density. Many of those who have been of a loving nature are not wanderers, but those of this particular origin of second cycle. Questioner, are all of these entities still with us in this cycle? I am Ra. The entities repeating the third density major cycle have, in some few cases, been able to leave. These entities have chosen to join their brothers and sisters, as you would call these entities. Questioner, were any of these entities names that we know from our historical past that have appeared as incarnated beings we find in our history? I am Ra. The one known as Sound Vibration Complex St. Augustine is of such a nature. The one known as St. Teresa of such a nature. the one known as Saint Francis of Assisi, of such nature. These entities, being of monastic background, as you would call it, found incarnation in the same type of ambiance appropriate for further learning. Okay, I'll pause there.
There's two Saint Teresas that I'm aware of.
Right. I think
Did they mention which one? There's Saint Teresa of Avila, who was a mystic, and then there's Saint Teresa of I forgot where, but the most recent one.
Right. Well, she would have been alive, right? At the
Calcutta.
time in the 80s, she would have been alive, and they tend to not name entities who are still alive. So I would be prone to believe that it's the historical Saint Teresa.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, so I want to zoom in on this question. BJ and I were reading this earlier today. And so it sounds like what Ra says is at the end of the second major cycle, so 25,000 years ago, there were 345,000 incarnated humans on Earth. And the harvest was only 150 who went positive, which was 0.04% of the population were harvestable. And they say that that group of 150 were visited by a Confederation being and kind of like given the download of like, all right, here's what's up. You know, here's the vision of kind of the broader vision of like what the Earth is undergoing, what the sort of like, you know, the telepathic linkage they offered to the planetary complex, as well as like, you know, like just the high metaphysical, spiritual truth of, you know, it spoke of the oneness of infinity of all creation and of those things which await those ready for harvest. So they probably like laid out this scenario, like y'all can move on and you can go into fourth density positive, and this is what it could be like for you. And this is what third density Earth is up to. And, you know, this is what Gaia is up to. And then those entities chose to stay. They chose to stay on Earth and keep reincarnating. And then here's where I get a little bit lost, and I'm curious to hear if any of you have any clarity about this. There was a cultural group that was associated with what those 150 who weren't harvestable quite, but they were pretty advanced. They were close to it. But they also didn't stay. There were those peripherally associated with this culture which did not stay. So it seems like we're in 2213 says, as a group, they stayed, meaning the 150 harvestable entities stayed. And then they say there were those peripherally associated with this culture which did not stay. However, they were not able to be harvested either. And so, beginning at the very highest, shall we say, of the sub-octaves of third density, so we can call that 3.7, repeated this density. So I'm curious, does that mean they repeated it somewhere else? They didn't stay on Earth, but they went to a different third density planet and incarnated in 3.7 somewhere else? And then further, my extension to that question for you guys is, Don's like, did any entities during this final 25,000 years, did any entities harvest? Where am I? And they said, so Don said in 22.14, are all of these entities still with us in this cycle? So are all those 150 souls still with us? And Ra says the entities repeating the third density major cycle have in some few cases been able to leave. These entities have chosen to join their brothers and sisters, as you would call these entities. So does that mean they left Earth and went to be in some other planet with those other entities who reincarnated somewhere else? Thoughts?
That's the impression I got when I read it.
that they incarnated somewhere else, that there was the associated group that left Earth, but went to a different third density planet.
Yeah, that was the impression I got was of that, and part of it is because there was a channeling that I read. It was the channeling that led me to the raw material. And they talk about those who are not harvested going to another planet and to do their cycle. So I think that was kind of seated in my brain, and that's what caused me to have this, to have that impression when I read this.
Do you want to say what that was? You don't have to.
I would like to, but I can't remember. So I'll have to find it and then I can
No worries.
share it in the resources.
Cool. That's no worries.
That seems inefficient.
To leave. What seems inefficient?
Did we lose you, Sean? I don't know if you're talking, but we can't hear you.
John, we heard you say that seems inefficient, and that's all we heard. Okay, we'll come back. I'm sure he'll be back. Nia, did you want to jump in?
Yeah. I also had the impression, shared impression that you stated, Aaron. It left a little to the imagination because Dawn specifically asks, as a mind, body, spirit, complex third density being, and yet I felt like Ra responded with a more possible on the inner planes, or more possible third density. Didn't, like, they needed to leave in order to, so they were such a higher, like you said, 3.7, like they were the upper level of the third density, and so to continue forward they would need to do that on a different planet, and chose not to continue to do that here. That resonated with me as well. I don't think I explained that very well, but yes. The other thing I was going to say is the thing that stood out to me, you know, the idea that one of the Confederation shows up as a light being, visually showing a light shield, and shows golden words. And so this was however many thousands of years ago, and we're looking at the incarnation Ra had into Egypt, and Ra's experience was a third density mind complex. They got teachers. They were like, cool, 2 thumbs up, we'll just learn these teachings and move forward. No qualms there, no doubts, and revisiting that just was a straightforward line for them. So when Ra incarnated into Egypt and was like, we're all smacking our foreheads going, how did you not see that coming? That the elites and the royalty would take over the teachings and distort them. How did you not see that coming? And Ross said something to the effect of, yeah, we could have looked ahead, but we didn't. We trusted that this would work out, and we kind of oopsied that one, y'all. And Ra explaining this as a successful teach learning transmission, shared transparency of the law of one as it is, was successful as well. So that just was kind of like, oh, I can kind of see where Ra might have been coming from a little better, having had this as an example. as what Ra thought would happen when Ra showed up, being this really tall, golden, shining being, would just, the transmission would go over really well. And that wasn't the case, you know, and so many of us are just like, really? How did you not see that coming? So after this example, it makes me feel a little more empathetic for, or sympathetic rather, for Ra and their attempt at sharing the law of one in the way that they did initially, and why they would be doing it this way now. We're all like, why would you not just incarnate now? And well, we tried that. That didn't work out so great. So we have to do it a different way now.
Well, and another part of that comparison of Ra's visit and the Confederation's visit to this group of 150 entities is that, you know, Ra came and walked among us. It's not clear whether or not this Confederation light being came among the entities while they were incarnated or after they had already disincarnated. My impression, the image I get, is that the Confederation being visited them in time space after they had harvested. So they went through the harvest process. They were harvestable. You know, they ascended the stairs of light. They were clearly past the threshold of fourth density. And then the Confederation being came and visited them as a group, is how I take it. And so this appearance and this download they got may have happened in time space and not space time. And it would have had a different impact. I mean, if the Confederation came to Earth as a light being while they were still alive, I'm sure it would have landed differently. And I'm not sure that they didn't. It might be possible that the Confederation entity came while they were alive, but the impression I get is that because they say that they were a harvest, you know, they made harvest essentially, or were harvestable. I kind of feel like they must have ascended the steps of light and then got visited. And another thing that backs that up is that when Ra teaches about the harvest process, they say there's 3 groups that attend the process, and the Confederation is there. The Confederation entities send representatives to the harvest event when the souls like do the thing and walk the steps of light. Confederation members are there, and so it might have been that this light being was a part of that group. Anyway, just some thoughts and speculation. Shang, are you back? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm back. Sorry.
So you're saying you think it's inefficient. Did you want to say more about that?
To switch to a different planet when the master cycle isn't over.
Yeah.
I have the same confusion as you, Aaron. Like, I understand, like, not being at the end of the master cycle, you have no choice but to go to a different planet because the planet no longer supports you, but the planet still supports you. Like, switching completely different body forms means a completely new set of distortions that you have to work through.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, wanderers come in, they have all sorts of issues. I don't know. I have no idea why Ra said that the way they did.
Yeah. Well, they might have just decided to go to a planet that was vibrating 3.7 because Earth wasn't. Earth was not vibrating 3.7 in the beginning of the final of the 3 master cycles. It was, you know, who knows, 3.3 maybe. So they might have chosen to go to a planet that was like that had a sort of like ambiance that matched their core vibration.
Well, and I see it the other way, that it might be easier. We are continually told how unique the situation here is with the negative path and the confusion with so many different soul groups incarnating. And I have a visual of other planets being a lot simpler to deal with third density. So having those same entities being that high in third density and then choosing to incarnate again might kind of knock them down a peg. As Ra has stated more than once, that a soul can sometimes take on more than they can actually manage. And so we can end up harming ourselves and harming our leveling rather than those lessons being beneficial. We may need to take more time on the inner planes for healing process than otherwise. So I had visualized it the other way, that it would be easier. And yes, there's validity to what you're saying too, Shang, that it would be strange and different, but it could also be a lot simpler.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, we can only speculate. I don't know if any of you, I might have this wrong, but I think there was a documentary called Aluna, Aluna, and I think it documented the South American tribe of the Kogi, Kogi, who is, if I understand it, if I remember correctly, like they understood it as their purpose, their like entire purpose of existing and incarnating was to be stewards of the earth and be protectors of the earth. And their whole culture is built around ceremony, honoring the earth, listening to nature, and trying to bring balance to where there's imbalances in nature. And they took it upon themselves to try to like install this gold wire from the mountains to the ocean, because there was this profound imbalance in the nature there. Is this ringing a bell to anybody? Anyway, I don't know. I mean, I have no idea who might be the remnants of that 150, but this group comes to mind. And then there's another culture that comes to mind that were there's another South American group from Peru who I have heard about from one of my shamanic teachers. It sounds like it could have also been them, but again, it's all speculation. Who are these 150? Who are those 150 harvestable souls? We had the discussion over on the Telegram over the last week about how many souls might harvest, and anyway, just underscoring the percentage of the end of the second major cycle, 0.04%. Hopefully we can beat that at the end of this final master cycle. Anyway,
the 150 that graduated, they don't necessarily have to incarnate together in one group, right? They could have just spread out all across like society over time.
Yep, absolutely. And that seems more likely, given that they were, the examples they gave were that took a monastic life, so they probably just popped into these cultures where they could do that and then have the impact that they could spiritually in those contexts. But it does seem more likely that they were like these singular figures, these saintly figures within a monastic community, to spread that vibe around.
Aaron.
Yeah.
I just found that documentary for free on YouTube. Do you want me to put it in the resource page?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. And I also found the channeling that led me to the Law of One. And
do you want to say?
Yeah. It's called the sorry, gotta pull it up on my phone. It's a channeling from people who call them, not people, but y'all know what I mean the second time. The Intergalactic Board of Council is the people, are the entities who are channeling through someone named Gizana or Jizana. I found it because I accidentally, material was, if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, this was the material that was channeled in a UFO landing pad that's managed by the native people of Hawaii, and which I literally physically fell into one time when I was out perusing the island, and I accidentally stumbled upon a UFO landing pad, and it's a long story, but night fell and I couldn't see anything, and the lava rock was black, and there were no stars because it was clouded, and I couldn't see, and I fell into it, and I could feel I stopped. I was walking through, and it was myself and 3 other friends, and we all stopped, and we all got like full body chills, and we were like, what just happened? Something is wrong. Like, not something's wrong, but like we got we all had the feeling that we needed to not be there. And so I was walking, and as I was walking, I hit the sign, and I was able to put my phone light on the sign, and it was like UFO landing pad, and it's there's only 2 in the world, and one was created and is caretaken by the indigenous people of Hawaii, and the other in the First Nations people of Canada. And this woman channeled there, and there is a lot of overlap with the law of one, but I think that this material is a little bit more distorted, in my opinion, but that's up for everyone else's discernment. But there's interesting overlap enough that when I found the material, when I was reading the channelings, the same website had the raw material, so I felt called to that, and I clicked, and it was enough. There was enough overlap that I was really taken aback by the similarities, and it felt like something that I really needed to hear. So I'll share that, and for anyone who might be wanting to read it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that tends to be my experience too. I don't at this point do a lot of seeking out of new channeled sources, but the channeled sources that I have come across, it does seem to me that a lot of the sources are Confederation. I mean, the message just is like, it resonates. There's so many crossover points from entirely different channeling sources that seem to correlate pretty well. And none of them are trans channeled, and none of them had, I think, a 6th density entity on the other end. So I think the raw material is a bit unique, but I think that as a group, the Confederation is just sharing this perennial message of oneness and spiritual evolution, and all the pieces of that.
I just want to say something before we move to Nia. I just wanted to say, Rachel, it's fascinating to me, all of the stories that you have. Like the longer I know you, it's like you've had some wild experiences. Maybe I would like to read your biography or like your life history sometimes. It seems like you have way more years than you seem like you have. So
it's funny that you say that, because I've had 2 therapists in my life, and they both have told me that I should write a biography, because my life has been extremely varied and crazy. In my 32 years, I've lived like 7 different lives.
Yeah.
And my first therapist, she was visibly excited for me to come in and just say some stories. She's like, oh, what? She said I was very interesting. So I have never written a biography, because I don't think anyone would really read it, but I like to share. And if you've noticed in the groups, oftentimes I respond to people with stories, personal stories, and I don't like to share. I don't like to seem like I'm oversharing, but I just feel like my life journey this time around has involved a lot of personal experience, and sharing that personal experience feels like the way that I can share the lessons that I've learned this lifetime through that, because they've been very different. There's been a lot of different things that are pretty wacky. Not the typical life that one might expect of a American in the 2020s. But anyway, so thank you for that. Thank you for saying that it's interesting, because I don't want to share if it's not.
I'll put another plug in for I'd read that bio too. Well, friends, at 5, Nia, I saw you had your hand up. I don't know if you put it down because you saw the time, or but you're welcome to say what you wanted to say before we close.
It's really quick, but it feels really important to me personally that you mentioned the percentage of harvest, and we're like, yeah, surely we can beat that number. And my brain went to I'm not attached. If it's not here, it'll be somewhere else. Gaia is going into fourth no matter what. Whether a third density soul needs to incarnate, gets to graduate and move with her, or go somewhere else, it'll be what it'll be. There's so infinite opportunity for that elsewhere. And for some, it could be fun to switch it up. For some, we have an attachment to Gaia. For some, it could be our home planet is elsewhere. And we're like, oh man, that was rough. Glad we got to turbocharge our learning while we had that opportunity on Gaia. Now I'd like to get back to a simpler evolution of my spirit complex here. So that, we're all like, yeah, we're rooting for a higher harvest. And it's okay if it's not. I have a lack. At first, I had a yes, and now I'm in this place of, I say non-attachment, but I'm in an extreme acceptance of, yeah, if it's not here, it'll be somewhere else.
Yeah. Thanks, Nia. I appreciate that. I do think it's healthy to, form a attitude of acceptance towards what reality brings us, and also, serve in the way that we can. What's the quote, BJ, like highest excitement, least attachment to outcome? What's the thing?
Yeah, that's Bashar. I think it's something like follow your
Your highest excitement?
your highest excitement that you can find in the moment with the least attachment to outcome, or something like that. I can find it and share it.
Yeah, it's a sweet, short little
I want to hear that. Yeah.
for life. But that, it's the attachment piece. Let's do our best and give the rest to God, even though ironically we are part of that one. So anyway, thank you, friends, so much for yet another engaging, illuminating conversation. Appreciate
Thank
this
you
time
all for
together.
your shares and openness. We'll not see
Yeah.
you next week, but the week after.
Correct. Yeah, and we'll put info on the thread about that. So
Bye.
until next time, bye everyone.
Next time.